One evening, when I was in my junior of high school, my mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at the desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. While I was doing my homework, I put on my headphones and listened to loud music. There was a big storm that night, and my desk was facing the window, so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents got back around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off the headphones. As soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout my name. What on earth happened in here? She demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and saw that the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. "I have no idea how those got there," I said. I spent the whole night at my desk, doing my homework. I watched as the look on her face changed from anger to confusion, and then to fear. We both realized it at the same time. Someone else must have been in the house. We followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually left unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there was no trail of footprints leaving through the back door. All of a sudden, we hear something, a loud, pounding noise that echoed throughout the house. Then, the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slammed shut again. We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. "Please come quickly," she shouted. After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One officer stayed with us in the garage while his partner went through the house, searching it room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was no one in the house. As we were all breathing a sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "It's mine," I told the officer. She asked us to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway, up the stairs, into my parents' bedroom, and then towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at my door, which had been open the whole night. Scrawled on it in black marker was the following: 8:47 I see you. 8:53. You forgot to lock the back door. 8:59. You seem focused. 9:24. Turn around. 9:47. Look at me. 10:15. Look at me. 10:37. Look at me. 10:49. Look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think what would have happened if I had turned around. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had large punctures, and the right fender was crumpled against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "We must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both of the tires. You can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "No," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare in the boot. I'll have to walk back into town and find somebody to tow the car," he said. "It isn't that far from here. You wait in the car while I'm gone." "Okay," she said reluctantly. "But please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight," replied her father as he slammed the car door. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour passed and her father still had not returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance, walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned around to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man. He was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand, swinging it back and forth. Something about him made her very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both doors in the front of the car, then jumped into the back seat and locked the rear doors. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, the man raised his arm and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding and she struggled to breathe. The grotesque expression on her father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open and his eyes were rolled back in his head. When the man reached the car, he shoved his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed, bloodshot eyes. His hair was wild and matted with dirt. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment, he just stood there, in the driving rain, grinning at her like a madman. Then, he reached into his pocket, took something out and slowly lifted his left hand. He was holding her father's car keys. It was a warm spring night, and I was 13 years old. My parents had gone on holiday for the weekend, leaving me home alone. I invited my two best friends, David and Arnold, over to keep me company. We were in my bedroom, listening to music. Arnold reached out and lowered the volume. "Hey, why don't we tell some scary stories?" he said. "Sounds like a good idea," Dave agreed. "Who's gonna go first?" I volunteered, but I don't know if I should tell it." "Come on," said David. "Let's hear it." "Okay," I said. "It's a pretty terrible story I heard once. It all happened many years ago. There was a man who had a 7-year-old son. His wife had died giving birth to the boy. They lived way out in the countryside, and there were no neighbors for miles. They didn't even have a phone because at the time the lines didn't stretch out that far. One day, the father came home from work, and he was horrified to find that his house was on fire. He immediately thought about his young son, and he rushed inside, calling the boy's name. When he heard his son answer, he realized the poor boy was trapped in his bedroom. The father ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A beam had fallen from the bedroom ceiling and blocked the door. He banged and banged on the door with all his might, but it was too solid. He even rushed against it with his shoulder, trying to break it down. But it was no use. All the time, he could hear his son screaming. The boy was in a panic. screaming and crying out for help. The man kept trying to batter down the door, but no matter what he did, it held firm. He shouted in rage. He wailed in despair. He no longer thought about anything else, just the door and his son screaming on the other side. His son burned to death in the house. The father died too. He never managed to open the door, and he stayed there to the end, desperately trying to break it down until he succumbed to the smoke and the flames. Arnold looked at me in disgust and said, "That's not scary." "I have to admit it's pretty weak." David agreed. "It's more sad than scary." That's when I decided to tell them the last part of the story. I hadn't planned on telling them that part, but I got carried away trying to impress them. It was so stupid to continue. I should never have told them. Wait, you don't know the rest of the story. I see. Ever since then, the father's ghost is still trying to open the door and save his son. And if you say, well, I'd rather not say the exact words. But basically, if you call him and tell him that everything is burning, and ask him to come and help you, his ghost will appear at your door and take you away. David looked at me thoughtfully. "Have you ever tried it?" "No," I replied. "I'd be too scared to test it out." Arnold had a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Hey, we should do it right now," he said. I tensed up. I had no desire to summon a ghost, and I was already sorry I had said anything about the legend. David smiled. "Yeah? Why not?" I was going to tell them that I didn't want to do it, but they didn't give me a chance. Arnold put on a trembling voice to imitate the little boy and screamed, "Daddy. Daddy. Help me. The flames are all around me." Then he burst out laughing. I didn't crack a smile, but he laughed. David watched him with amusement, saying nothing. Arnold started screaming again, even louder this time. "I'm burning, Daddy. I'm burning." "Stop it, Arnold. It's not funny," I shouted. I didn't mean to. It just came out of me. I was really scared, and I didn't want to hear him anymore. "What are you afraid of?" Arnold laughed. "Oh, come on. It's just a stupid story, that's all." "Not even a good one." With a smirk, he continued, "Daddy, please help me. The fire is burning me alive." All of a sudden, there was a loud knock on my bedroom door. Arnold stopped in mid-scream. We all froze. There was an eerie silence. We all looked at each other. Boom. 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 We almost jumped out of our skin. Boom. Boom. "What's that noise?" Arnold exclaimed. "If this is a joke, it's really not funny," said David. The banging on the door continued. Then we heard a man screaming. Those horrible cries will remain forever etched in my memory. I can still hear them now. It sounded like the cry of a dying animal. It was inhuman and infinitely sad. The banging against the door and that horrible scream continued relentlessly. I was terrified and tried to hide behind the wardrobe. Arnold grabbed a chair and stood poised to strike anyone who entered the room. David curled up against the wall. Tears were streaming down his face. No, he cried. "What is this?" Immediately, the screaming outside the door grew stronger. Even more harrowing, even more terrifying. The banging on the door grew louder. I thought it was going to fly off its hinges. Then panic seemed to overcome David. "I can't take it anymore," he wailed. I've got to get out of here. With that, he ran to the window. No, I cried. Don't. But before I had time to finish my sentence, he jumped out the window. I heard him fall. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then I heard him cry out in pain. I fell. I'm hurt. I ran to the window and looked out. David lay on the concrete downstairs, screaming in pain. The screaming coming from behind the door got even louder and more crazed. I was going crazy. It was all a relentless nightmare, and David's screaming only added to the horror of the situation. Especially since Arnold and I were too scared to leave the room to help him. Then I smelled something. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now the air in the room was filled with an awful stench. It was suffocating. The smell of burning flesh. I turned away from the window and saw Arnold standing motionless in the middle of the room. His eyes were wide, and he was staring at the door, as if in a trance. The banging, the screaming, the shouting, the stench of burning flesh, and the sight of Arnold spewing was all too much for me. I began to throw up as well. I leaned back against the wall as David continued to howl outside, and the furious knocking on the door continued. Then, I had an idea. Maybe David's cries outside were attracting the man outside the door. I closed the window. We sat on the floor with our hands over our ears, shaking in terror as the cataclysmic blows against the door continued unabated and the awful cries pierced our eardrums, and the burning stench mixed with the smell of our vomit. Gradually, the screams died down, the smell subsided, and the banging on the door grew weaker and weaker, until finally everything was silent. All we could hear were David's muffled cries of pain through the closed window. Arnold looked at me and asked me in a low voice, "What do we do now?" "Maybe we should call the police," I said. "Or the fire department." "I don't know." "An ambulance to help David." "Where's your phone?" he asked. "Downstairs." "Do you think it's gone?" "Well, it's quiet." I replied hesitantly. "That's right," he said. "We'll have to go down." "Well, I'll go." "Anyway, it's gone, right?" "I guess so," I said. Arnold got up slowly and hesitantly walked to the door. He gently seized the handle and pushed the door open and peeked into the hallway. Then, with a smirk on his face, he turned to me and said, "It's crazy. The door was open all the time. This stupid ghost." But he didn't have time to finish his sentence. In a flash, a hand came around the door and grabbed Arnold around the neck. He stood there petrified without screaming, eyes wide in terror. The arm was blackened and charred. I could smell the burning flesh. Before I had time to react, Arnold suddenly disappeared right before my eyes, dragged through the doorway and whisked down the hall at an impossible speed. The door slammed shut with a deafening clatter. I got to my feet and ran to the door, but I didn't dare to open it. I called Arnold's name again and again, but there was no response. I still couldn't bring myself to open the door. I was afraid that the charred man was still there. Nobody ever saw Arnold again after that night. My parents took me to a psychiatrist. I never told her anything, or anyone else. Not even my parents, they would never have believed me anyway. David did the same. He spent a month in the hospital. He broke his back in the fall. Even today, I still have a fear of opening doors. I'm terrified of what I might find on the other side. Thanks for watching and joining us on this spooky journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more bone-chilling content. Stay brave, stay curious. And until next time, sweet nightmares.